your character will know what to do if you properly understand story structure, and then you'll just follow them. And because they have a goal, they have a drive and a goal, and they want to get what they want. And it's kind of like that simple. You're listening to Screenwriters Need to Hear This with Michael Jamin. Okay, welcome back, everybody. This is Screenwriters Need to Hear This, our podcast, and today we're talking about writer's block and inspiration, Phil. Yeah. That's what we're talking. That's what me and you are talking about. The people at home are not going to talk about it.
That's okay. They can talk along if they want, but then I'd recommend seeing some type of professional.
Yeah, we're not going to listen if you talk. That's a podcast. That's how it works. So we're talking about. I get that question a lot. Like, how does it work for writers? Do you have to wait for your inspiration? Do you sit down? How do you help make inspiration strike?
Does the muse speak to you? Right.
Yeah. Well, who's my muse? And guys, here's the thing. Professional writers, you can't wait for inspiration because, you get paid. You get paid for episodes produced. And so you can't say, oh, I'm blocked today. I have writer's block. They're not paying you for that and you'll get fired. So you got to really, you really have to rely on all the tools that you learn as a young writer and hopefully, or that you study as an aspiring writer to get you through, to push through when you don't feel like writing or you don't feel like you have anything there. And part of the, part of the process of getting better at your craft is constantly working, is writing, even if don't feel like it's great. Like, okay, we'll still write because it's going to help you along. It's going to, make you, the process will make you a better writer, even if what you are not writing is good. Right?
Yeah. It's almost like the momentum carries you through those moments. It's the fear on the other side of whatever it is, that the fear to get started is what holds people back.
Yeah. You got the blank page, but don't feel like anyone has to read your first draft. It's for you. It could be terrible. It's all right. Just get something out on paper and then you can proceed,
Yeah, I feel like we've had some of these conversations in the private Facebook group for your course. Mm-hmm. And I remember telling the story. I was talking to my buddy, Rich, and he said that his first writing class, he showed up and he hadn't done any of the work. And the professor was like, why didn't you do the work? And he thought he was being smart. So he said, writer's block. And he said his professor lost his mind. And he had this beautiful quote. He said, writers write. Writer block is a failure of your own ego.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. You got to, you're a writer, then you have to write. So I wanted to tell a short little story about like people waiting for inspiration. And so 20 years ago during 9/11, I was a writer on King of the Hill. And so on that horrible day, we got a call from the producers like, hey, the country's under attack, don't come in. And it was fine. We were all glued to the TV anyway. None of us wanted to come in. And the next day we had to go to work. And of course, now we're in shock and we're in mourning. And, it was just, it was awful. And I remember driving to work. My office was in Century City. That's where we worked, which is in LA. And the cars that day, you'd sit in traffic and you could just feel the grief. You could look at the guy in the next car next to you and you knew that they were feeling what you were feeling. And like you look outside and like no one was honking, everyone was just still. And it was this awful, horrible thing that all of us were experiencing. And then we go into the building, we finally get to work and we go up to the writer's room and there were about 20 of us on King of the Hill. And we sat around for the first several hours just talking and trying to absorb the horror of what happened and what was going to happen because of this. And at the end of the couple hours, it was like, okay, well, I think we have to go to work now because we're getting paid to write a comedy. And none of us were in the mood to write comedy. I promise you, for the next several weeks, none of us wanted to write comedy. It felt disrespectful. It felt sacrilegious. It felt, people had died and now we're going to make jokes. Like, how do you do that? But what was the alternative? Like, okay, quit, I guess, and not pay your bills. And so I remember we were all, we were in the room, right in the writer's room, and we were working, either pitching jokes or coming up with story ideas for the future episodes. And someone would pitch a joke and no one would laugh. Someone would say, yeah, okay, yeah, that's okay. We can do that. That's good. And someone, another joke, okay, that's funny. So no one was laughing, but we just knew like what's a good idea and what's a better, and we're just relying on honestly, no one wanted to work for the several days. We were just relying on our craft. There was no inspiration. There was no muse. It was just, this is your job. Now you have to do your job. And so that was my takeaway from that. One of my takeaways from that awful day was like inspiration, like forget it, man. That you don't just do your job.
I think there's a takeaway tangentially to that too, which is the work that you were doing in that room that day ultimately helps people recover from such a traumatic experience. And it reminds me of why I wanted to become a writer. I was, as you know, I grew up in some pretty crappy circumstances, really poor kid from Oklahoma. And I just remember like television and film were an escape to me. They were a way to kind of get out of the bad experiences I was having. And ultimately, I looked forward to providing that exact same experience to people. So what would have happened to the millions of people who watched those episodes 6, 7 months, 8 months down the road and laughed and enjoyed and were able to heal a little through laughter had you not done your work that day?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't exactly life-saving. We're not exactly first responders, but
right, but it's still there are millions of people who are just going through things and they just look forward to what we do as
take
writers.
their mind up.
Exactly.
To take their mind off of it. And and if they had known that we were writing it the day of, like I wonder what they would have thought. Like it's
right.
And again, our heart wasn't into it, but you still do it. And I think that if you were to watch those episodes now that we wrote then, I don't think you'd know that, we wrote that the day after 9/11,
Right. But to your point, it's the experience and the craft that kicks in. It's not some ethereal thing out of your control. It's just sitting down and doing the work.
Yeah, and knowing what the work is. And that's why a lot of people, like, I don't know, they just think they write from the gut. And like I don't write from the gut. I write from how I've been taught. And so like screenwriting needs to be learned. I don't get why people think it's like, I'll just write. It's like, well, okay.
Yeah. My first feature, the first thing I ever sat down to do was a feature, and it was very much from the gut, and it just kind of meandered and pittered out at the end with no real third act. And I imagine if I were to open, I have a copy of it printed somewhere, but if I opened it today, I'd just be like, what was I thinking? Because it's just, it's just thing upon thing happening and not really getting anywhere.
Well, that's what someone left a comment on one of my TikToks or Instagram or something, and they were saying, I'm 10 pages into it, and I don't know, now I'm losing interest. How do you keep your interest up in writing? How do you? It's like, well, you're not losing interest. Your character doesn't know what to do, and the reason why your character doesn't know what to do is because you don't understand story structure. And it's like, it is your fault. Your character will know what to do if you properly understand story structure. Then you'll just follow them, and because they have a goal, they have a drive and a goal, and they want to get what they want, and it's kind of like that simple. So if you're losing interest in your story, well, imagine how your reader or your viewer is going to feel. They're going to lose interest with you. If you can't stay focused, then they're going to stay focused. And so the way to get around that is to know your craft, to understand your craft. Yeah. Hi guys, Michael Jamin here. I wanted to take a break from talking and talk just a little bit more. I think a lot of you guys are getting bad advice on the internet. I know this because I'm getting tagged. One guy tagged me with this. He said, I heard from a script reader in the industry. And I was like, wait, what? Hold on, stop. My head blew up. I blacked out. And when I finally came to, I was like, listen, dude, there are no script readers in the industry. By definition, these are people on the outside of the industry. They work part-time, they give their right arm to be in the industry, and instead they're giving you advice on what to do, and you're paying for this? I mean, that just made me nuts, man. These people are unqualified to give my dog advice. And by the way, her script is coming along quite nicely. And I'm not done. Another thing, when I work with TV writers who are new on writing staffs, a lot of these guys flame out after 13 episodes. So they get this big break, they finally get in, and then they flame out because they don't know what is expected of them on the job. And that's sad because, it's not gonna happen again. So to fight all this, to flush all this bad stuff out of your head, I post daily tips on social media. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook at Michael Jamin Writer. If you don't have time, 2 minutes a day to devote towards improving your craft, guys, it's not going to happen. Let's just be honest. So go find me, make it happen. All right, now back to my previous rant.
That's a big note out of your course group that people have talked about, the difference between plot points and story points. Mm-hmm. And I was just having that conversation before we sat down to record this podcast with my buddy McKay, who sent me a first draft of a new feature. And he's established. He's done television and he's done features. He's been an editor. He's done quite a bit of stuff. And that was ultimately the conversation was, when your character is making the decisions, you're just following your character making the decisions that lead to that next step. Because you understand where they're going.
Yeah, they have a strong drive, so you can't get in their way because they want something, and if they don't know what to do, it's because they don't know what they want, and if they don't know what they want, well, that's your fault.
Yeah,
as a writer. One of the things, I don't know if we talked about this, but it might be worth mentioning again, and is that we both. It's funny, the things pop up at the same time, and we both were telling a story. There's a story from this book, Art and Fear, by David Bales and Ted Orland. And I think we talked about it briefly in the last.
Well, we might have talked about it. I know we talked about it in your private group. You posted it there, and I commented because I had read the same story that's cited, and that ultimately led to me. I read this story cited in another book that led to me reading this book in June. Right.
Okay.
So
people are talking about it. I want to share this story with our listeners here because I think it's so important. And so this, again, is taken from their books. We didn't come up with this. But I guess apparently there's a ceramics teacher, and according to the story, that announced...
And the book is Art and Fear by David Bales and Ted Orland.
Right.
Yeah.
And the ceramic teacher announced to his class that he was going to divide the class into two groups. And on the left side of the studio, he said everyone's going to be graded on quantity of amount of work they produced. And on the right side, they'll be graded on quality. And this went on for a couple of weeks or whatever. And at the end of the time when everyone was being graded, the people who worked on quantity, all the A's were found in that group because their work was, even though they didn't focus on quality, their work was better just because of the fact that they had kept on working and working and working and churning out more stuff. And that got the quality higher than the people who were just supposed to make one work and make it great. And so there's so much, and that's an analogy. That same thing for screenplays. There's so many people like, oh, I got the screenplay, but it's not perfect yet. I got to make it perfect. Okay, finish it. Move on to the next piece, because I guarantee you that the next one you write and the next one after that will be better than the one before it. And it's just it's the act of working on it. So don't stop polishing this thing. Put it away already. Put it away and move forward. Yeah.
I got the story from the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, and he uses it as an example of saying that if you're trying to establish a habit and you fail, it's because you don't identify as the type of person who performs that habit. Mm-hmm. So you mix that with, what Stephen Pressfield says about becoming a professional and turning pro, which is you sit down every day and you just do the work because that's what professionals do. And his whole point is you have to stack minor wins upon minor wins, and ultimately that's how you become the type of person who does what you're trying to do. And you identify as that.
And a lot of you are like, yeah, sure. You're like, well, that's great if you're a professional writer, but I'm not. I have a day job and I have 2 kids. And you're like, okay, all right, I totally get. So just if you can commit to a half hour a day or whatever, if you can commit to or even if you're in the car or if you're taking your commute, turn off the radio and commit to the people who are listening to this podcast are already doing this. You have to divide, if you can put an hour or a half hour of work into your day towards bettering your craft, there's 3 things you can do. You can work on studying. You could take lessons. You could watch things or read things, and then you could just learn. And so this is just listening to this podcast is part of the learning one. So okay, what are you going to study and learn? Okay, I'm listening to this guy, professional writer, talk, and that's part of your training. So that counts. And then if you can come home and just jot down some notes that you have from this idea, or work on a page, or work on a page of your outline, just whatever you can do to move that ball just a little further down the field. Is better than not doing anything at all or just fretting about it,
Exactly. I think that's a key thing, though. You made a big difference, a differentiator there, which is it's not just about learning, it's about applying it in some way.
Yeah, you got to practice it. Yeah.
There's a big push that people believe knowledge is power, and it's not. It's the application of knowledge is power. Mm-hmm. So it's not just understanding it theoretically. And you can get locked down in theoretical understanding and spend a lot of time there and feel like you're doing the work. But at the end of the day, your page count is really what matters, right? It's that 10,000 hour rule. It's the 20,000 pages. Go ahead.
And that applies, it's funny you say it, because that applies in the writer's room. Often a young writer, a young staff writer, they'll pitch on something and then they'll come up with a rule. Oh, I think this story point or this line needs to accomplish these 5 things. Or in this story, I think the story should be about, and they talk theory. It should be about this by also accomplishing that. And then we're all like, okay, you got a lot of rules here, but we can't shoot those rules. So pitch something concrete. Even if it's wrong, pitch something, what can we film, And, and then someone will pitch, even if you agree on whatever this theoretical role that this new staff writer is pitching, and then someone will come up with an idea that doesn't fit any of those rules that we all agreed to, fine. But that's a fine idea too. Let's just do the one that person pitched because we can shoot that. And you're like, hey, I was writing on Wilfred, which was a really hard show to write for because he was a talking dog. It was on FX, and you weren't supposed to know if the dog was an actual real talking dog, like magic talking dog, or if the dog was the guy, like a figment of his diseased imagination, like whether it was his psyche being able to talk, the main character's psyche. And so every line of dialogue for the dog had to work on two levels. We used to call it was Wilfred's Wilfred and Ryan's Wilfred. It has to work on both levels. And then one of the other writers says, I don't know, I just want to see the dog dance. Don't you think people just want to see the dog dance? And we all just laugh because yeah, I think so. I think people want to see the guy in the dog costume dance.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. So I guess the next step or the next question is, the people listening to this are probably the people who are going to do that. But there are probably a lot of people listening to this, and I know I've been guilty of it, who are like mired down with some ego-driven writer's block. Mm-hmm. And the question then becomes, what steps would you take to overcome that ego, right? Assuming that ego is the real problem here, how do you get rid of it? What are your steps? I have some ideas, but I'd love to hear yours.
Oh, yeah, I'd like to hear yours as well. Like, for me, it's like no one has to read that first draft or even the 10th draft. Like, just write it. No one has to look at it other than you. And you don't have to shit on it yet. When you're done, the world will shit on it. So you don't have to join in. There's plenty of people who are going to do that. You just do your best and keep moving forward. Just put it on paper. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's the big thing that rings true in my head was something you just told me randomly one day, and I think it made all the difference, which is no one cares. No one cares.
No one cares. Now, there's a wonderful quote by Oscar Wilde, and I love that. I don't memorize quotes a lot, but this one I remember. And he says, I think he said it, although I can't find out if he did say it. He said, you'd worry less about what people would think of you if you realized how little they did. Yeah. And that works on two levels, obviously, that people are not really, if you realize how little they did, they're more concerned with their own things. They're not really concerned with what you're wearing, what you're doing, what you look like or whatever. They're really more concerned with how people see them and how they see themselves, because that's just vanity and that's how people work. And two, they already think you're an idiot, so what difference does it make how you write?
Yeah, right.
So what difference does it make?
So we've propped ourselves up, and this is a big one for me because I come from a very conservative background, a very conservative religion. And so I wonder, like, what are people going to think when they see, like, it's like my character swears, but then, Stephen King on Writing says that it's not my job to censor the character and that the character's voice is the character and they're not me, so I should do what the character wants, not what I want. And it's a balance of all those things, and I think that piece of advice was really monumental because I really had to stop and think, okay, first of all, like, why do I care about these people's opinion in the first place? Mm-hmm. Right? Ultimately, are these people that are going to have some big overarching decision-making ability in my life to control me? Mm-hmm. Or are they people who already love me and are going to love me no matter what because they're my family or my really close friends? Right. And the answer is exactly what you said. They either don't care or they don't care. Right?
Yeah, exactly. They don't care. So just write what you want to write, move it, And Brene Brown I'll talk about this, I think, in another podcast, but she has a wonderful special on Netflix, and she goes into this in detail about why you really shouldn't care what anybody else has to say. Just do what you want to do, with your work. Yeah, I read a lot of Stoic philosophy through Ryan Holiday, and this is one of the big things they talk about. He's got a great book for anyone who's struggling with this kind of stuff. It's called Ego is the Enemy. Mm-hmm. And he basically lays out how ego kills you before you start, while you're doing it, and when you succeed. Like, it's a battle the entire time. And when you succeed, yeah.
Yeah, like, ego will kill you. And he talks about Grant, for example, and how Grant, it was his lack of ego that helped him win the Civil War for the U.S., but it was his ego that drove him to the White House and ultimately to bankruptcy.
Oh, interesting.
Right. Yeah. On his deathbed, he sold off all of his war memorabilia in order to provide some type of inheritance to his family. Wow. And so this ego is it's the problem. So overcoming your ego is step one. And so you might ask how. Well, Stoic philosophy helps a ton with that because you ultimately think like, hey, like Marcus Aurelius, the leader of the Roman Empire, the most powerful man in the world, says, hey, like, I bathe and there's flies in my water too. just like everyone else's, right? Like
Right.
it's my water's dirty after I get out of the bath,
Right.
just like yours is. So there's no difference between us and everyone else. So why do we care? The other thing that really stood out to me was an experiment from Tim Ferriss called fear setting. I believe it's fear setting is what he calls it. But it basically says just get out a piece of paper and get the fear out of your head. Write down what are you afraid of. And you have to, this does one thing really powerfully. You quantify it. Why am I afraid to start writing? Well, I'm afraid I'm going to be judged. I'm afraid I'm going to be a failure. I'm afraid it's not going to be perfect. And then when you read that back to yourself, you realize how ridiculous some of that stuff is.
Right. Right.
And then how do you mitigate the fear, right? You literally write out, like, how do I prevent that from happening? And in the case where I can't prevent it, what is the scale of 1 to 10 that it's going to be detrimental to the point of I want to kill myself.
Right.
And ultimately you find out, like, nothing is the end of the world. Nothing.
Yeah, it's funny. The way I see it, the way I've learned it is I say this to myself: what lies am I telling myself? And it's kind of very similar. It's like, yeah, what lies am I?
Yeah.
Like, no one's gonna judge you. They don't really care that much. But
what story am I telling myself is the other one I've heard. What's the story I'm telling myself? And there's always a story.
But if you come back to, and like I said, I think we said this before. It's not like you need a great idea. Yeah. Most ideas are not great. You just need a good idea executed great. And so the execution is that part you can study and you can learn. The great idea, you don't need a great idea. That's your craft. The great idea comes from, all you need is a good idea. Like,
that just popped in my head. It's like a man falls in love with a woman from another civilization and abandoned his culture to join hers. What movie am I describing?
Was that the Avatar? Avatar.
Or Pocahontas.
Or Pocahontas. Yeah,
or
right.
Dances with Wolves.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Right? There's about a million other. Ferngully.
Right.
For my kids from the 80s. Right? They're all the same story. They're just told in such a compelling way that you want to watch them, and they all reach and speak to you different ways.
Right. Yeah. It's funny. There's a show called Foundation on maybe Netflix or whatever. It's a brand new show. I don't know. It's on one of the streamers, Amazon. I don't know. And it's about it's about the future. A civilization takes place in the future that's on the verge of collapse because of the way its government is set up. And if you watch it, it's based on the Isaac Asimov book. So he was a sci-fi writer, right? And so if you watch it, it's easy to think.
Apple Plus, I think.
Apple Plus.
Yeah.
If you watch it, you could think, oh, wow, look at this future government. But if you watch it for more than 5 minutes, you go, okay, they're not talking about the future. They're just talking about the Roman Empire. They're setting it in the future. So the story is old. It's just, it's an old story. You don't have to come up with something brand new. You just have to execute it well.
I've got a sales book over here called the DNA Sales Method, and it literally talks about how you can use historic stories to better tell principles to potential clients. And so this is the exact same thing. It's just taking history and setting it in a different setting. It's the same story, just a different, like you said, telling that idea in a wonderful way.
Yeah. So
and that's craft, right?
Yeah, it's craft. Come up with an average story and just do it well.
Yeah.
The story doesn't have to be fantastic. So don't put that kind of pressure on yourself. You can put pressure on yourself other ways. So
yeah. Okay. So we write, we get our idea, we learn our craft.
I think you got to do 3 things. You got to study, you got to read and watch, and you got to practice. We talked,
And practice, I think, is the key. It's like Bill Walsh, a pretty famous coach. That's one of the things that he started every season by teaching his players how to put their socks on.
Really?
And the question is why? And it's because blisters cause problems, which cause issues later in the game, which cost you games.
Right.
So it's the fundamentals.
Yeah.
So what would you consider to be the fundamentals of practice then?
Of practice? Well, I'll write a scene or a story, and sometimes I get lost, and I'm like, or like I said earlier, I don't know what I lose focus, or what's going to happen next, and then I always was, okay. Go back to the basics. What does my character want? What's getting the character's way? It's always 101. And sometimes with a scene's not working, you look at it from afar, you go, oh, it's so obvious why it's not working. I got lost in the weeds. I got more interested in the minutia, and I forgot to look at the bigger picture. And that's all craft.
Got it. It's a pretty simple answer. Seems like a lot of the answers you have here are really simple. It's just learn craft.
Yeah, I remember when I was on King of the Hill, I was talking to Greg Daniels one day. And I sat down and we were just having a conversation. Greg liked to talk theory about, writing theory. And I said, Greg, there is no writing 102. It's all 101. And he's like, oh, like that's great. He used to write down just like witticisms like that and put them in a book. He had a book of like just phrases like that, which he thought were perfect. And he goes, that's going in the book.
That's awesome. That's awesome. It's all writing 101.
Yeah.
That's great, man. Well, do you have any other thoughts or feedback for people who are struggling with writer's block or inspiration?
That's it. They can, maybe follow me on Instagram. I post every day. So hopefully, again, that should be part of your routine. I usually post, it's like 3 minutes tops. Usually it's 1 minute or 1 to 3 minutes. It's like, if you don't have time for that, if you don't have time for a 3-minute Instagram video to help you along your way, then it's not going to happen. I'm going to be honest.
I think that's a pretty powerful point, and I've caught myself doing this living in LA, where I will go several days without even thinking about writing, and then I catch myself and I think, okay, I live in one of the most expensive cities in the world. With the money I make now, I could live a very good life anywhere else in the United States.
Yeah,
and I feel like I'm barely scraping by in LA.
Yeah,
why am I doing this unless I'm focused on my craft? And it's like, when I find myself listening to podcasts about stoicism more than I do sitting down at a final draft and typing out pages, that's when I realize that my priorities are out of whack and I'm getting lost in the minutiae, as you put it.
Yeah, you got to make time for yourself. That's a gift for yourself.
Yeah. All right, great feedback. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. That's it. Join us for our next one coming up soon.
This has been an episode of Screenwriters Need to Hear This with Michael Jamin and Phil Hudson. If you'd like to support this podcast, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing this podcast with someone who needs to hear today's subject. If you're looking to support yourself, I'd encourage you to consider investing in Michael's screenwriting course at michaeljamin.com/course. I've known Michael for over a decade, and in the past 7 years, I've begged him to put something together. During the global COVID-19 pandemic, Michael had time, and I have to say, I wish I'd had this course 10 years ago. As someone who's personally invested in most online courses, earned a bachelor's degree, and actively studied screenwriting for over a decade, this course has been more valuable to me than most of the effort I've put in because it focuses on something no one else teaches: story. In his course, Michael pulls back the curtain and shows you exactly what the pros do in a writer's room, and that knowledge has made all the difference for me, and I know it will for you too. You can find more information at michaeljamin.com/course. For free daily screenwriting tips, follow Michael on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at michaeljaminwriter. You can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Phil A. Hudson. This episode was produced by Phil Hudson and edited by Dallas Crane. Until next time, keep writing.